For this month's Book on Display event, we remain in the 19th century, but leave Venice behind and travel east to Calcutta. The book I have chosen this time is a small volume entitled Ճանապարհորդութիւն Հայs, Journey in Armenia or Amongst Armenians, written by Mesrop Taghiadian and published in Calcutta in 1847. The book is dedicated to Catholicos Nerses V, head of the Armenian Church and the author's early mentor. And the title page tells us that the publication of the book was funded by Armenians scattered throughout India. In fact, right after the introductory pages, there is a list of Armenians living in Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, and the Dutch East Indies, who had taken up advanced subscriptions for the book. Mesrop Taghiadian was a prominent educator, writer, translator, and publicist in the first half of the 19th century. He was born in Yerevan in 1803 and was educated at the headquarters of the Armenian Church in Etchmiadzin. Aged 20, he traveled to India through Iran and enrolled at the Armenian Philanthropic Academy, before transferring to the Bishop's College after the local Armenian priest put in a good word for him with Reginald Heber, Anglican Bishop of Calcutta. He studied at the college for 4 years, learning English, but also Persian, Latin, and ancient Greek. After graduation, he embarked on translating works from English literature into Armenian. After a brief spell in Etchmiadzin in the early 1830s, Taghiadian was back in Calcutta, where for the next quarter of century he immersed himself in writing, teaching, and publishing books and a newspaper. In 1857, he was invited to teach at New Julfa, the Armenian suburb of Isfahan, but fell ill en route and died in Shiraz in 1858. Taghiadian's book is a descriptive account of the historical geography of Eastern Armenia as it was in the early 1820s. He gives detailed descriptions of the nature, the weather, towns and villages, agricultural activities, and water resources. He was particularly interested in fish and fishing. As such, the book is very rich in Armenian fish nomenclature, many of which, as far as I can tell, occur in print for the first and some the only time. The book also contains a wealth of ethnographic information, including birth rate, mode of life, pilgrimages, customs and traditions, sometimes also singing the praise of, quote, the beautiful countenance of our nation. During his travels, Taghiadian came across local dialects, which he transcribes faithfully, thus providing a valuable record for future scholars of Armenian linguistics. Some dialects were so incomprehensible to him that he had to resort to another language to understand a fellow Armenian. One such encounter occurred in the town of Agulis in the present territory of Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic. A child brings a message for the author from a former classmate living at the monastery of St. Thomas. Taghiadian doesn't understand a word of what the child is saying. He then tells the child, "Do you know Turkish?" The child says, "Yes." "Say it in Turkish then," the exasperated Taghiadian tells the child, who then proceeds to repeat the message in Turkish. The book begins with a short biographical section about the author and continues with a detailed descriptive of Etchmiadzin and surrounding areas, including interesting observations about the archaeology of the region. Taghiadian also writes at length about the central administration of the Armenian Church and its various officials after the Russian conquest of South Caucasus, and the imposition of a set of regulations to oversee the activities of the Church. The greater part of the book is devoted to the description of the province of Ararat, followed by shorter descriptions of the provinces of Syunik in the south and Udik in the east. On his way back from the eastern provinces, Taghiadian meets Catholicos Yeprem, who, unable to meet the tax demands of the Khan of Yerevan, was fleeing towards the Russian garrison in Shushi. He describes with some bemusement that the Catholicos and his retinue were in such a hurry that they celebrated evensong on horseback, in the dark, and in the middle of nowhere. Taghiadian's book is heavily annotated by a previous owner. The annotations are mostly in Armenian, but some are in English and Persian. Sometimes these annotations turn into commentaries on the text. For example, when the author says that on a January day he personally witnessed 500 snakes emerging from their burrows in the Ararat Valley. The commentator writes Sutlik, little liar, on the margin. This book was part of a collection of old Armenian printed books, which arrived at the doorstep of the Armenian Institute a couple of years ago. A Greek woman from North London had left the box with a message that the books belonged to an Armenian lodger who had died without a next of kin. No name was given. It required a painstaking effort to go through the pages of all the books to find a name for their previous owner. One name that kept creeping up over and over again was that of Tadeos ter Dionysiosian. Unless another information comes to light, we have put that name against the relevant catalogue entries. A good proportion of the books in the collection were early 19th century Armenian publications from India. Armenian printing started in India, with the first press established in Madras in 1772 by the wealthy merchant Shahamir Shahamirian. Over the subsequent decades, more printing presses were set up in Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, and a considerable body of Armenian literature was produced in India. These were works of medieval Armenian writers, translations from European languages, but also original works from contemporary writers living in India and elsewhere, with most propagating the ideology of a national revival. India was also the birthplace of the first Armenian newspaper, the monthly Azdarar, which began publication in Madras in 1794. But why India? Early Portuguese travelers mentioned the presence of Armenians in India well before the 16th century. They were mostly merchants or employed as officials in various Indian states. Their numbers grew greatly in the 17th and 18th centuries, when large waves of Armenians arrived from Iran to settle in India. These Armenians were wealthy merchants, members of an extensive mercantile network that stretched from Amsterdam to the Philippines. India was not an unfamiliar place for these merchants. In the half-century since the foundation of New Julfa in 1606, they had extended their trading activities to markets in the subcontinent. A reminder of these unproductive links with England is a portrait of Emin which hangs at Hagley Hall in Worcestershire. Failing to garner support for his endeavour, he returned to India and died there disillusioned. The Armenian intellectual life in India was at its peak when Taghiadian arrived there in the early 1820s and found a fertile ground for his literary output, setting up a printing press and producing nearly 24 works covering a wide range of subjects. Taghiadian had found suffocating the absence of intellectual interest in Echmiadzin. Despite its distance from the Caucasus, he knew that India was the place where his talents would blossom and be recognized. He wasn't mistaken, and our book here bears witness to that. We made a quick tour d'horizon and returned to this unassuming volume. I'm sure it has not escaped your attention that this book is in a sorry state of preservation. Conservation at the Armenian Institute Library is critical to preserve the collection for present and future generations. If you have enjoyed hearing about this book on display, you might consider adopting this valuable volume. You can do so by donating through the Armenian Institute website, specifying the object of your donation. We will send you a personalized acknowledgement and will place a customized bookplate inside the conservation box housing your item. Thank you very much for listening.